Chapter 6. The Uncontrolled Experiment. The cavern's walls thrummed with energy, the warpstone veins embedded within them glowing brighter, illuminating the eerie, jagged space with an unnatural green light. Skritch could feel the pulsing power, raw and volatile, coursing around him, filling the very air with its dense, intoxicating presence. This place, this secret heart of Blackcinder, was like no other he had encountered. Here, the mountain breathed power. Kreese crouched nearby, fiddling with his machine, his claws twisting knobs and adjusting wires with feverish precision. His warp contraption was built to extract warp energy from the veins, but its success was uncertain. Skritch had agreed to this risky endeavor with only a shadow of faith in the device. The warpstone's power could do more than mere machinery would allow. It could open doors, warp reality itself, if properly harnessed. And Skritch intended to harness every ounce of it. "Kreese," he growled, his voice low and commanding. "Is the machine ready? I will not be kept waiting." The warlock engineer barely glanced up, his attention riveted on his device. "Nearly ready, Greyseer. Warp energy this potent demands, precise calibration. One misstep, and the flow will, well, you've seen what happens when it's not controlled." Skritch's eyes narrowed, his claws tightening around his staff. "Control is not the issue, Kreese. Only will. I have more than enough of that." "Will alone won't keep this from detonating in our faces," Kreese muttered, though he wisely kept his gaze on the machine, avoiding Skritch's glare. At last, the device emitted a low hum, the crystal at its core lighting up with a sickly green glow. Kreese looked up, his expression a mixture of excitement and dread. "It's ready. The warp energy flow can be amplified now, but once the process starts, it cannot be easily stopped. You must be certain, Greyseer." Skritch sneered. "I am beyond certainty. Begin, and do not dare falter." With a deep breath, Kreese pulled a lever, and the machine emitted a low, rumbling pulse, its crystal flaring brighter. The warpstone veins responded immediately, their glow intensifying as the machine pulled energy from them, channeling it in a controlled stream toward Skritch. He extended his staff, feeling the energy flow through him, potent and fierce. The power was unlike anything he had ever felt, a force that surged through his body, filling him to the very edge of his limits. His mind opened, expanding, flooded with visions of worlds beyond, realities twisted by chaos, alternate realms where Skaven ruled in glorious ascendance. But then, something changed. The machine began to sputter, the crystal within it flickering erratically, and Skritch felt the energy shift. The flow became unstable, the power fluctuating wildly, as though it resisted his control. His grip tightened around his staff as he strained to keep the energy steady, his chants growing louder, more insistent. "Kreese," he barked, his voice cracking with strain. "What is happening?" Kreese's eyes darted between the machine and Skritch, panic flashing across his face. "The flow. It's too much warpstone energy is too unstable for this rate of extraction. The machine, it's overloading." Skritch cursed, but he held firm, refusing to relinquish his grasp on the warp energy. This was his power, and he would not be denied. He channeled more force into his spell, trying to force the energy back under control, to bend it to his will. But the warpstone had its own will. The crystal in Kreese's machine shattered with a deafening crack, a surge of energy erupting from it in a chaotic blast that sent Skritch reeling. The power he had been holding twisted back on him, flooding his mind with a tidal wave of visions, images flashing too quickly to process, each one more intense and horrifying than the last. He saw himself standing over a vast, desolate battlefield, a crown of warpstone shards gleaming on his head. Armies knelt before him, Skaven legions armed with twisted, blasphemous machines. But then the vision shifted, and he was alone, standing amidst ruins, his body decaying, his mind splintering under the unbearable weight of the power he had sought to control. "No," Skritch snarled, clawing at the vision, refusing to be lost within it. The energy lashed out, wild and uncontrollable, tearing through the cavern in jagged arcs of green lightning that struck his warband. Skaven screamed, their bodies contorting, twisted into grotesque shapes as the warp energy consumed them. Kreese ducked behind a rock, shouting over the chaos. "Greyseer, stop the flow before it tears us all apart." But Skritch couldn't stop. The power had him in its grasp, a vice that clamped down on his mind, squeezing tighter with every heartbeat. He could feel the warp energy digging into him, reaching into the deepest parts of his being, whispering dark secrets, promises of dominion, of power unimaginable. In the madness, a fragment of his own voice, his own mind surfaced, an instinct of survival clawing its way to the forefront. He forced himself to remember his purpose, his reason for venturing into Blackcinder. This power was meant to serve him, not the other way around. He would master it, even if it killed him. With a final, desperate surge, he redirected the energy, focusing it inward, bending it to his will. The visions receded, the energy stabilizing, though he could still feel it thrumming beneath his skin, like a barely contained storm. He breathed heavily, his heart pounding, his vision blurring as the warp energy settled, docile, within him. When he finally opened his eyes, the cavern was silent, save for the faint crackling of energy lingering in the air. His warband lay scattered, some motionless, others twitching weakly, their bodies warped and twisted beyond recognition. Kreese emerged from behind the rock, his fur singed, his expression a mixture of awe and horror as he took in the carnage. Skritch rose to his feet, unsteady but defiant, his gaze cold as he surveyed the wreckage. His staff still glowed faintly, the energy within it subdued but potent, as though it waited for him to wield it again. He looked down at the shattered machine, a twisted, useless heap of metal and wires, Kreese's prized creation ruined. "Your machine was insufficient, Kreese," he snarled, his voice dripping with contempt. "I warned you of the stakes, and you failed." Kreese grimaced, but he bowed his head, unwilling to meet Skritch's gaze. "The power, it's too much, even for scryer machines. But with the right adjustments I could." "Enough." Skritch silenced him with a wave of his claw. "Your machines are pathetic, unworthy of the power that lies here. But I have seen its potential. I alone am fit to wield it." Despite his words, Skritch could still feel the faint tremor in his limbs, the lingering aftershock of the energy he had barely controlled. The Warpstone's power was far greater than he had anticipated, wild, defiant, as though it challenged his very right to command it. But he would not back down. He had tasted the power, felt its touch on his mind, and he would not abandon it now. As he stepped forward, deeper into the mountain's heart, he felt the pull of the Warpstone growing stronger, as though it beckoned him, daring him to return, to take the next step. He could almost hear it whispering his name, a call that promised both glory and ruin. And Skritch, Greyseer of the Under Empire, could not resist the lure. Chapter 7. Welcome to the Ascendancy. Greyseer Skritch opened his eyes to an unsettling quiet, a silence so complete it felt unnatural. He lay on a cold, hard surface, the weight of his staff still in his claw, though it felt heavier somehow, as if the warp energy had drained something from him. Slowly he rose, his vision clearing as he took in his surroundings. He was no longer in the depths of Blackcinder Volcano. Instead, he stood in what appeared to be an immense chamber, vast and dark, its high ceiling adorned with ornate carvings and twisted metal sculptures of Skaven gods and champions. Torches lined the walls, casting an eerie green glow that made the shadows dance with an almost sentient hunger. It was a sight Skritch had never witnessed, though it resonated with something deep within him. This place, it felt familiar, yet impossible. The air here was different, too. It was not thick with the acrid smell of the volcano or the oppressive heat of magma, but a dry, sterile odor, as if the very air had been cleansed of all impurities. And then there was a stillness, a quiet that unnerved him. Skavenblight was never quiet, never still. Even in the depths there was always movement, always a rustle or a scrape to remind one of the endless chittering masses. "Kreese," he called, his voice low but sharp, echoing slightly in the cavernous room. But there was no answer. The warlock engineer, his machines, the remnants of his warband, all were gone. His tail flicked in irritation. Had the Warpstone's power thrown him alone into this strange realm, severed from the others? Or had it somehow granted him a glimpse into another plane? His mind spun with possibilities, but none could explain the strange sense of gravity that tugged at him, as if some invisible force had drawn him here for a reason. He took a step forward, his claws tapping against the stone floor, and his eyes adjusted to the dim green light. Ahead of him, at the far end of the chamber, he saw a dais, and upon it, a massive iron throne. But this was no ordinary throne. It was a grim, twisted creation, draped in chains, with jagged spikes curving outward like the claws of a great beast. Seated upon it was a figure cloaked in shadow, barely visible save for the faint gleam of two malevolent eyes that burned with a quiet, terrifying intelligence. "Approach, Greyseer," the figure intoned, its voice deep and resonant, filled with a command that brooked no defiance. Skritch hesitated, instinct screaming at him to bow, to lower his head in submission. But his ambition outweighed his fear. This was his moment, his chance to understand the power that had brought him here, and he would not squander it by cowering. He forced himself to walk forward, his claws steady as he approached the throne, the shadows parting with each step. As he neared, he saw that the figure was not alone. Around the throne, standing in silent, eerie symmetry, were other Skaven, Greyseers, all cloaked in the fine robes and talismans of their rank, their faces veiled in shadow. Yet they did not move, did not breathe. They were silent, watching, like sentinels carved from stone, and each bore the twisted symbol of the horned rat, inscribed in jagged lines upon their foreheads. You are the Council of 13, Skritch breathed, his voice barely more than a whisper. He could feel the weight of their collective gaze, a pressure that bore down on him like a physical force. "Not the Council of 13, you know," the figure on the throne replied, its voice echoing through the chamber. "In this realm, Skaven rule all. The Under-Empire ascended, and now we hold dominion over every surface realm, every hidden kingdom, every race that once dared to defy us." Skritch's heart raced, a thrill shooting through him at the words. He tried to imagine it, a world where Skaven ruled undisputed, their claws in every shadow, their power absolute. It was what he had always dreamed of, what he had promised himself with each clawed step he took toward power. But something about the figure's tone chilled him. There was no triumph there, no gloating. Instead, he heard weariness, resignation. "If you rule all," Skritch began, his voice steady but questioning, "then why do you sit here in darkness, surrounded by silence? Where are the armies, the slaves, the endless chittering that should fill these halls?" The figure's eyes gleamed, and Skritch felt a flicker of amusement from it, bitter and sharp. "Ah, Greyseer, you understand so little of the cost of dominion. For each throne we took, each city we conquered, we sacrificed something of ourselves. Skaven are creatures of ambition, of ceaseless hunger. Yet when there is nothing left to take, nothing left to dominate, the hunger turns inward. We became not rulers, but prisoners of our own desire." A cold dread spread through Skritch, settling deep in his bones. He looked around, truly seeing the figures encircling the throne now, and understood. They were not Greyseers in the true sense, not like him. They were husks, their eyes hollow, their expressions empty. They had lost everything to their ambition, until there was nothing left but the desire to rule for ruling's sake. But there is power in this," Skritch argued, his voice faltering. "The warpstone, the rule over all. This is what the horned rat desires." The figure laughed, a sound like brittle glass shattering, a joyless noise that sent a shiver down Skritch's spine. "Perhaps the horned rat cares not for your ascension, Greyseer. Perhaps he revels only in the striving, in the clawing, in the betrayal, not the result. For even gods tire of monotony." Skritch's mind raced, his thoughts tumbling over one another in a frantic attempt to make sense of what he was hearing. This could not be true. The horned rat had granted him a vision of ascendance, of power beyond measure. He had been shown his destiny, and it was not to wither away on a hollow throne, stripped of purpose. This was a trick, a test, a way for him to prove his will. He straightened, defiance hardening his resolve. "I reject this future," he spat, his voice echoing through the silent chamber. "I was not brought here to learn caution, but to understand the fullness of my potential. You may accept stagnation, but I am different. I will wield this power, and I will not fall into ruin as you have." The figure on the throne tilted its head, considering him with those cold, gleaming eyes. "Then learn." "Greyseer," it replied, its voice heavy with finality. "But know this, the path of power you seek is an endless one, and it will demand everything you are, everything you hold dear. You will never rest. You will never know peace. For this is the curse of ambition. It consumes all, until nothing remains but the hunger." Skritch smirked, baring his fangs. "Then let it consume me. I have no need for peace, no need for rest. I was born for power, and I will claw my way to it, no matter the cost." The figure on the throne nodded, a gesture of reluctant acknowledgement. "Then so be it, Greyseer Skritch. Embrace the path you have chosen, and remember this moment when you stand upon the ruins of all you have conquered, and wonder what it was you truly sought." The chamber began to darken, the light fading from the walls, the torches flickering out one by one. The last thing Skritch saw was the gleam of those eyes, watching him with an intensity that felt like judgment, like a warning etched in the dark. And then, with a final pulse of warp energy, the world vanished, and Skritch found himself once more in the depths of Blackcinder, the warped stone walls around him returning to harsh, stark reality. His warband lay nearby, groggy and disoriented, as though they too had experienced the strange vision. He tightened his grip on his staff, feeling the lingering energy of the vision thrumming through him, filling him with a cold, relentless drive. The ascendancy was a warning, yes, but also a promise. If he had to hollow himself out to achieve that power, he would do it. There was no price too high for dominion. Chapter 8. The Cost of Dominance. Greyseer Skritch steadied himself against the cool, uneven rock wall of the cavern, his mind still reeling from the vision he'd been shown in the otherworldly throne room. The shadowed figure's warning echoed in his thoughts like an irritating buzz he could not swat away, and the memory of those hollow-eyed Greyseers, trapped in a prison of their own making, haunted him. But he would not allow himself to dwell on it. Whatever the price, he would pay it to claim the power he sought. "Power demands sacrifice," he muttered to himself, feeling the familiar conviction settle in his chest. He glanced around, noticing the dazed expressions on the faces of his warband. They had returned from the vision world with him, but whether they had seen the same twisted revelations, he could not tell. If they had, none of them dared to speak of it. Nearby, Kreese was scrambling to his feet, his eyes wide, fur singed at the tips from some earlier misfire of warp energy. He looked shaken but quickly masked it, his calculating gaze landing on Skritch, as if seeking confirmation that their venture into the depths of Blackcinder was worth the risk. Skritch sneered, brushing the dust from his robes. "Pick up your machines, Kreese. We're close to the warpstone's heart. I can feel it pulsing." He could almost sense the rhythm, a steady beat in the core of the mountain, calling to him with promises of dominion. Kreese nodded, his claws deftly working over the remnants of his contraptions, reassembling and adjusting gears, crystals, and dials with almost feverish speed. Yes, we'll be ready. But Greyseer, this place, it resists us. Warp energy here behaves differently, unpredictable, almost as if it has intentions of its own." Skritch scoffed, though he couldn't entirely dismiss the warlock engineer's observation. The energy in Blackcinder was potent, alive, unlike any he had encountered. He could feel it as a weight, a presence in the air that pressed down on him, testing his resolve. But he wouldn't admit that to Kreese. "Weak-minded nonsense," Skritch spat. "The warpstone is merely testing us, waiting for a will strong enough to command it. And I will be that will. Not you, not the Council, not even the horned rat himself shall deny me." As Kreese muttered under his breath, Skritch turned his attention to his warband. His claws tightened around his staff as he studied them, each one battered and frayed from the journey, their eyes wide with fear, tails tucked close as they exchanged wary glances. The warband had served him well so far, but he knew that their loyalty was held by the thinnest thread. In Skaven society, loyalty was a commodity as fickle as the wind. It could be purchased with power or dissolved with fear. "Listen to me," Skritch's voice echoed through the cavern, silencing the murmur of the warband. "We stand on the edge of a new era. The heart of Blackcinder holds power beyond your limited minds. power that will raise us above all others. But only those with true strength, true commitment, will share in its rewards. A few of the Skaven stood straighter, their chests puffed with a cautious pride, while others cast fearful glances at the darkened depths, as if something unseen lurked there, watching. One clanrat in particular, younger and visibly nervous, spoke up, his voice barely a squeak. "But Greyseer, we saw things, strange things. This power, it isn't natural. It feels wrong." Skritch's eyes narrowed, his lip curling into a snarl. He advanced on the young Skaven, his staff crackling faintly with warp energy. "Are you questioning me? Questioning the path I lead you on?" The clanrat shrank back, trembling. No, Greyseer, I only." Skritch raised his staff, its glow intensifying. "There is no room for weakness. This is the price of greatness. Power is not given, it is taken. If you lack the will to see it through, then you do not deserve to stand here." Without hesitation, he brought the staff down, a surge of warp energy blasting the young clanrat. A high-pitched scream filled the air as the Skaven convulsed, his body writhing as the energy consumed him, twisting him into a scorched, misshapen husk. The air smelled sharply of burnt fur and flesh, and the others looked on in horrified silence, their loyalty cemented by fear. Skritch turned his gaze back to the rest of the warband, his voice cold and unyielding. "Remember this, I am the only one who can lead you to victory, and I do not tolerate doubt." The others nodded vigorously, and Skritch could see the terror in their eyes, mingling with the spark of ambition. They feared him, yes, but they also saw his strength, his ruthless commitment to his path. It was a powerful motivator, and Skritch knew it would keep them obedient. Kryze watched the scene with an unreadable expression, though his eyes held a glimmer of something, perhaps respect, or perhaps wariness. "Effective," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else, "though these methods may have a cost." Skritch smirked. "A cost? You speak as if that matters. Cost is irrelevant when the reward is absolute. Those who cling to life and comfort will die in obscurity. Those who take risks, who pay the price, will rise." Kryze didn't respond, though he cast a quick glance at the smoking remains of the clanrat before returning his attention to his devices. Skritch could sense the subtle change in the warlock engineer's posture, the heightened alertness. It was good. Kryze needed to know his place, to understand that he too was expendable if he failed to serve his purpose. With the warband sufficiently cowed, Skritch felt a surge of triumph. This was what it meant to lead, to dominate, not through charm or respect, but through fear, the most powerful motivator of all. They would follow him because they feared him more than they feared whatever horrors Blackcinder held. That was the way of the Under-Empire. As they moved deeper into the mountain, the warpstone veins grew thicker, their glow pulsating with a hypnotic rhythm that matched Skritch's own heartbeat. He could feel the mountain's energy reaching out to him, offering glimpses of power, visions of conquest and control. It was like a drug, addictive and consuming, and he craved more. But with each step, he could feel the subtle tug of something else, an echo of the vision he'd seen, a whisper of warning that lingered at the edge of his thoughts. The price of dominion, the cost of ambition. He could see it now in his warband's eyes, the way they looked at him, not with loyalty, but with the hollow fear of prey caught in the gaze of a predator. And yet he relished it. Fear was the essence of power, the surest way to ensure obedience. The journey had taken a toll, not just on them, but on him as well. He could feel the strain of the warp energy, its pull relentless, draining him, making him sharper, but also thinner, as though every pulse of power took something from him that he could never regain. But he pushed the thought aside. Weakness was the only true enemy, and he would not allow it a foothold in his mind. Ahead, the path began to widen, opening into a vast, shadowed expanse. The cavern was filled with a thick haze of warpstone dust, and at its center lay a massive pool of molten rock, bubbling with veins of liquid warpstone that shimmered like molten emeralds. The energy here was blinding, its presence so overwhelming it felt as though the mountain itself was alive, watching him, testing his resolve. Skritch stared, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and hunger. This was it, the heart of Blackcinder, the very source of the power he had sought. The cost, the warnings, the sacrifices, they all faded in the face of what lay before him. He could feel his pulse quicken, his mind sharpening, consumed by a single blinding purpose. He would claim this power, no matter what it demanded of him. And with it, he would forge his own destiny, ascending to a place beyond even the Council's reach. The cost of dominance, of ambition, it was steep, yes, but to Skritch, it was worth every sacrifice. He would become something greater, something indomitable, and all would bow before him. Even if, in the end, there was nothing left of himself to bow to. Chapter 9. The Council of Gracies. Greyseer Skritch held his breath as he entered the inner chamber. The air was thick with warpstone dust, a fine shimmering mist that clung to his fur and filled his lungs with an electric energy that buzzed at the edge of his thoughts. Ahead of him lay a vast, circular hall, shrouded in deep shadow, with pillars of jagged stone rising from the ground, like the fangs of some monstrous beast. The Council of Gracies awaited him, the true power of Skavenblight, seated high above him on a raised dais carved from solid warpstone. Skritch could barely make out their forms, cloaked and hooded, their eyes gleaming in the dim light. Each Greyseer held a staff crowned with a shard of warpstone, glowing faintly as they muttered and chittered in low, conspiratorial tones. Their presence filled the chamber, an oppressive weight that bore down on him, as if daring him to stand under its crushing intensity. He took a deep, steadying breath, forcing himself to keep his head held high, though the sight of the assembled Greyseers sent a thrill of fear through him. This was no mere gathering, it was a trial, a test to see if he was worthy of the power he sought. And Skritch had come too far, sacrificed too much, to fail now. The murmuring stopped, the silence stretching like a taut wire as one of the Greyseers, an ancient, withered creature with fur so pale it seemed almost translucent, leaned forward, his voice rasping through the chamber. Greyseer Skritch, you stand before the Council. You have journeyed far, yes, to the depths of Blackcinder, to the heart of the Under Empire's power, and now you seek to claim it, to rise above your station. The words dripped with a bitter, mocking amusement. Skritch resisted the urge to snarl, knowing that even the slightest display of disrespect could be his undoing. I seek only what is mine by right, he replied, keeping his voice steady, laced with a thin veneer of humility. The Horned Rat himself has shown me the way, a path that will lead our kind to dominance, to ascension. A harsh, humorless chuckle echoed from another Greyseer, his voice twisted with disdain. Ascension, you are but a cog in the endless machinery of Skavenblight, Skritch. Ambition is a fickle thing, fleeting, as fragile as warpstone dust in the wind. Many have come here claiming destiny, yet all are forgotten, their names whispered only as a warning. Skritch felt his claws clench around his staff. He forced himself to breathe, to quell the fire in his chest. He had not clawed his way through Blackcinder's depths to be dismissed, to have his purpose diminished by those who sat in their stone chairs, surrounded by their trappings of power, too blind to see the truth. But he kept his voice steady, masking his anger with a forced calm. My journey has revealed more than just raw power, he said, his gaze flicking over the Council, meeting the gaze of each Greyseer in turn. I have seen visions of the ascendancy, of Skaven ruling above ground as well as below, of a world shaped by the will of the Horned Rat. You, mighty Council, may have grown accustomed to your seats, to the power you wield, but I am not content with a mere throne. I will claim this realm and the next. The Council was silent, his words hanging in the air like the faint odor of decay. But then, the oldest Greyseer spoke again, his voice laced with something between respect and mockery. You speak boldly, Skritch, yet visions are merely that, images cast by the warp, illusions meant to ensnare the weak-minded. Tell us, why should we believe that you are different from the countless others who have stood where you now stand, who thought themselves chosen? Skritch's heart thundered in his chest, and he could feel the pulse of the warpstone at his side, the power that he had gathered from the mountain's heart. This was his moment, his chance to prove himself. He raised his staff, letting the shard at its tip catch the ambient light, casting fractured, sickly green patterns across the chamber walls. I have touched the very core of Blackcinder, he said, his voice rising. "I have felt its power, its raw, unrestrained energy, and I have not faltered. My mind has seen beyond the veil, has glimpsed the truth of what lies in the horned rat's design. I do not seek your favor, Council. I offer you mine." A sharp intake of breath echoed around the room as the assembled Greyseers exchanged wary glances. Skritch knew he was pushing boundaries, defying their authority in a way that few would dare. But he also knew that Skaven respected strength, dominance, the willingness to claw one's way to the top, no matter the cost. Another Greyseer leaned forward, his eyes glinting with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. "And what is it you offer, Skritch? Do you think yourself capable of bending Blackcinder's power to your will? Of achieving what no Greyseer before you has dared?" Skritch's lips twisted into a faint, dangerous smile. "I have already begun. The power of Blackcinder is mine to command, to channel. I have seen the heart of the mountain, touched its energy, and I have returned unscathed. No Skaven before me has dared, because no Skaven before me has had the will to survive it." The silence grew heavier, and he could see the glint of greed in their eyes, the spark of ambition that had not yet been snuffed out by years of stagnation. He was offering them a vision, a promise of power that could elevate them all, if only they had the courage to take it. At last the ancient Greyseer nodded, a slow, deliberate gesture that carried a weight of authority. "Very well, Skritch. If you claim such mastery, then prove it. Show us this power wielded here, in this chamber. Let us see if you truly command it, or if it commands you." Skritch's mind raced, his pulse quickening. This was the ultimate test, and he could feel the weight of their eyes on him, watching, waiting to see if he would succeed or fail. He drew a deep breath, focusing his mind, feeling the warp energy gather in his staff, the familiar crackling hum that filled the air with an electric tension. He closed his eyes, reaching deep into himself, calling upon the memory of the mountain's core, of the vision he had seen of Skaven dominance. The energy flowed through him, a wild, consuming force that clawed at the edges of his mind, testing his limits, threatening to overwhelm him. But he held firm, channeling the power, shaping it, bending it to his will. With a final, decisive movement, he raised his staff high, releasing the energy in a burst of blinding, green light. The chamber filled with a searing brilliance, casting shadows that danced along the walls, writhing and twisting like living creatures. The very air vibrated with the raw force of warp energy, and he could feel its effect on the other Greyseers, their awe, their fear, their grudging respect. When the light finally faded, Skritch lowered his staff, breathing heavily but triumphant. The silence in the chamber was absolute, and he could see the look of shock on the faces of the Council, a testament to the power he had just unleashed. The ancient Greyseer spoke once more, his tone cautious, laced with a hint of reluctant admiration. "You have indeed touched the power of Blackcinder, Skritch, and it seems it has not destroyed you, yet." Skritch's gaze was unyielding, his voice steady as he replied, "It is mine to command. Blackcinder's energy is only the beginning. I will not rest until the Under-Empire bows to me, and the horned rat himself acknowledges my strength." The Council exchanged glances, a silent conversation passing between them. Finally, the ancient Greyseer nodded, his expression unreadable. "Then we shall watch, Greyseer Skritch. We shall see if your ambition is your strength, or your undoing." The other Greyseers withdrew, their expressions wary, uncertain. But Skritch held his ground, his resolve unshaken. He had claimed a piece of Blackcinder's power, had shown them his strength, his will. And while they may have given him their grudging respect, he knew they would be waiting, watching for the first sign of weakness. But he would not falter. He would take what was his, climb over any obstacle, destroy any rival. He had paid the first cost of dominance, and he would pay any price demanded of him, for the horned rat's favor, for control over Skavenblight and beyond. As he turned to leave, the shadows seemed to cling to him, dark tendrils wrapping around his form, as though acknowledging him, marking him as something changed, something ascendant. And in the quiet of his mind, he heard the faintest echo of a promise, a whisper of a power that would one day be his alone. Chapter 10. discovering the Warpflare Crucible. Greyseer Skritch skulked through the cavernous underbelly of Blackcinder, his eyes scanning the labyrinthine passages as he descended deeper into the mountain's heart. The air here was thick with an unnatural quiet, broken only by the distant, ominous rumble of magma flows beneath. In this silence, his own breathing seemed deafening, punctuated by the occasional scrape of his claws on the stone floor. There was something here, something powerful that called to him, and he could feel its energy, an itch just beneath his skin, pulsing with the mountain's rhythm. Beside him, Skritch adjusted his makeshift warpstone detector, a warp device of gears and twisted copper wires, sparking occasionally with flickers of green light. The warlock engineer's fur was plastered with sweat, his eyes wide with a manic excitement that Skritch had come to find predictable in the scryer rats. Skritch was brilliant, yes, but his fascination with the warpstone bordered on reckless obsession. "Nearly there, Greyseer," Skritch muttered, his voice hoarse with anticipation. "The signal from below, it's too strong, too focused. Whatever it is, the warp energy is immense." He glanced at Skritch, eyes shining with fevered glee. Something powerful lies below, waiting. Skritch tightened his grip on his staff, feeling the faint hum of warp energy within it, resonating with the energies around him. He didn't need Skritch's machine to sense it. The power here was nearly overwhelming, a tangible force pressing down on him, as if Blackcinder itself were holding its breath. And he, Greyseer Skritch, was the one worthy enough to exhale that breath, to unleash whatever lay dormant beneath the stone. They rounded a corner, entering a wide, low chamber that was blanketed in an eerie, faint green glow. The walls here were covered in ancient Skaven runes, etched with a precision that surprised him. The markings spoke of conquest, of a time when Skaven ruled beneath the earth with an iron claw, even before the Council's formation. And at the far end of the room stood a strange altar, carved from pure obsidian and adorned with jagged shards of warpstone, embedded deep within its surface. Upon this altar rested a device unlike any he had ever seen, the Warpflare Crucible. It was massive, its base anchored by thick, rusted metal and crowned with an orb of dark, cracked warpstone that pulsed with a faint, sickly glow. The orb seemed to absorb the light around it, drawing in the ambient energy and radiating it back in twisted, corrupted patterns that made his eyes ache. Its intricate structure of wires and gears wove around the warpstone like the skeleton of some long-dead creature, clinging to it as if they, too, were enslaved to its power. Skritch let out a soft, reverent gasp, his gaze fixed on the crucible. "It's beautiful," he murmured, his voice thick with awe. "The Warpflare Crucible. I've heard of it only in whispers. A machine capable of amplifying warp energy, but far beyond any weapon Clan Skryre has dared to build. This could tear through reality itself." Skritch's mouth twisted into a vicious smile. Tear through reality, that was exactly what he needed. For he knew, as the visions had shown him, that his destiny was not confined to Skavenblight or the Under Empire. He needed to claim a power so great that it would shatter the very boundaries of worlds, to make himself unstoppable. And the Crucible would be his weapon, his gateway to becoming something more than just another Greyseer. He stepped forward, his claws itching to touch the device, to feel the warp energy contained within that dark orb. Its power hummed, calling to him, promising endless possibilities, if only he had the strength to wield it. But as he reached for it, Skritch's voice cut through the haze of his ambition. "Careful, Greyseer," Skritch warned, his eyes still fixed on the Crucible, though his tone had sharpened with caution. "The Crucible is unstable. Even I'm not certain what will happen if we activate it here in Blackcinder's depths. Its power could unravel us as easily as it could propel us." Skritch turned slowly, narrowing his eyes at the warlock engineer. "Do you doubt my resolve, Skritch? Do you think this power should be left unused, untouched, when it could make us gods above all Skaven?" Skritch flinched under his gaze, his claws fidgeting with the edge of his mask. "No, Greyseer, no. But to control the Crucible is to wield a blade that cuts in every direction. Without precision, it could tear through more than just worlds. It could destroy even the one who wields it." Skritch sneered, dismissing the engineer's warning. The crucible was his destiny. He could feel it, like a second heartbeat pounding in his chest. He knew the risks, yes, but he had come too far, sacrificed too much to balk at a mere threat of annihilation. This power would be his, no matter what it cost. "Then we shall proceed with caution," he said, masking his impatience with a tone of icy control. "But proceed we shall. Tell me what must be done." Kreese hesitated, his eyes darting between the crucible and Skritch's unyielding expression, then sighed, defeated. "Very well, Greyseer. The crucible draws from the warpstone veins beneath Blackcinder. We'll need to channel the energy carefully, let it build slowly, or it could destabilize and shatter. I will prepare the containment field." Skritch watched as Kreese moved around the crucible, adjusting its gears and dials, muttering calculations under his breath. He could feel the tension building, the anticipation of power about to be unleashed. Every fiber of his being thrummed with eagerness, his mind racing with visions of what he would do with this weapon in his grasp. The crucible was more than just a tool. It was his path to ascendance, to becoming something feared by all who dared oppose him. After several painstaking moments, Kreese stepped back, his face pale but resolute. "It's ready," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The warp energy will be amplified within the crucible's core. But remember, Greyseer, once the flow begins, there's no turning back. The energy will build until it reaches critical mass." Skritch met Kreese's gaze, a spark of triumph in his eyes. "Good. Then let us begin." He stepped forward, placing his claws on the cold metal of the crucible, feeling the thrum of warp energy coursing through its frame. He closed his eyes, drawing in the energy, letting it flow into him, feeling it build, a mounting force that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. His mind expanded, visions flooding him, of cities burning, armies kneeling, the world bending to his will. The crucible responded to his touch, the warpstone at its core flaring brighter, the energy building, swelling, until he could feel it vibrating through his bones. His mind raced with the intensity of it, the power threatening to overwhelm him, but he held firm, binding it with his will, forcing it to obey him. But then, a sudden tremor ran through the crucible, a crackling jolt of energy that sent a wave of searing heat through the room. Skritch staggered, his claws slipping from the metal, the energy within the crucible rebelling, lashing out in violent arcs of green lightning that struck the walls, the floor, leaving charred marks in their wake. "Too much," Kreese shouted, ducking as a bolt of energy seared past his head. "The containment field is breaking. If we don't stabilize it, the crucible will implode, taking us with it." Skritch's heart pounded, a furious roar of defiance building within him. He reached out, forcing his will upon the crucible, commanding it to yield, to bend to his strength. The warp energy lashed against him, wild and furious, but he stood firm, pouring every ounce of his resolve into the crucible. "Obey me," he snarled, his voice a growl of pure fury. "You are mine to command." The energy fought him, pushing back, but slowly, painfully, he felt it begin to yield, the wild power within the crucible coiling, settling, responding to his will. The warpstone's glow steadied, the lightning fading as the crucible stabilized, its energy now bound, subdued, under his control. He staggered back, breathing heavily, his mind throbbing with the strain, but triumphant. He had done it. He had tamed the crucible, forced it to obey him. It was his, a weapon of unimaginable power, ready to bend reality to his command. Kreese approached, his expression a mixture of awe and horror as he looked at Skritch. You actually did it," he whispered. "The crucible obeys you." Skritch turned, a cold, calculating smile spreading across his face. "Yes, Kreese, the crucible is mine, and with it I will bring the Under Empire, and the world above, to its knees." He could see the fear in Kreese's eyes, the understanding of what he had unleashed, but Skritch cared nothing for the engineer's terror. The power of the crucible flowed through him, a burning, consuming force that filled him with purpose, with destiny. The cost, the warnings, the risks, all of it was irrelevant now. For with the Warpflare Crucible at his command, he had become something more than a Greyseer. He had become the architect of his own ascension,